part of his context, his whole upbringing and stuff like that. And Gil Noble said, well, which brother did you speak to? And my father said, Filbert. He said, well, the brother you need to speak to is Wilfred. And what we learned was that Wilfred was Malcolm's best friend, his mentor, confidant throughout his life. And Dad went back to Detroit, earned a meeting with Wilfred. Wilfred sat down for 8 hours interview and just opened up. He wanted to talk about Malcolm X, his little brother. And as did Filbert. And my dad did speak to his other siblings, including Robert Little, who worked in New York under the Dickens administration. And so, fascinating stories. And what Dad came away from that was, there's a story here about Malcolm that needs to be told. How should it be told? And he said it's bigger than a magazine piece. So I was teaching English in China, and I came home for vacation, and he was telling me about it. I said, this sounds like a book. And he goes, I don't want to write a book. I'm not a scholar. I said, but it sounds like a book. And so it wouldn't let him go. When a story gets you, and hopefully this is a lesson to those who are writers or get storytellers, documentarians, graphic novelists, drawers. When a story gets to you, when it holds on to you, don't let that go. And find a way to express it. It's not just simply writing. It's how you express it. Communication covers so many ways. So that's why we call it multimedia, right? Mm-hmm. So for us, it was the classical biography. And when I came back from China permanently, my dad talked to me about this. I was thinking about going to journalism school. And my father said, well, I really want you to work on this with me. And for me, it was about, one, working with my dad, who I highly respected as a journalist, an editor, a manager, my father. It was a way of getting closer to him, but also learning journalism from him. And I felt that I would learn more from him directly than I probably would get in journalism school, and I still believe that. So one of the things I would say that I learned from him was not only about storytelling. Imagine being able to talk to somebody from your parents' generation about storytelling and how storytelling has changed and who's open to the changes. And those are the types of conversations we have while producing this book. And these were the lessons that impacted me as far as the storytelling of The Dead Are Rising and also my own storytelling. And, but I also want to make sure I acknowledge that my brother's here. This is a family production. My brother's right here in the front row. My mother was supposed to be here. She couldn't make it, Violet May. But the other thing we need to understand, and this is what comes out of this book too, that Malcolm was not alone. He had a family, and the family supported him. And he also supported them in his way. And it wasn't just the family of whom he married, Dr. Betty Shabazz, we all praise to her because she was a wonderful woman, and I had the opportunity of meeting her during one of my travels and spoke with her, and she's powerful. But also his family, his siblings, and his parents. As Baba Zaid just mentioned, that Ella Shabazz, his sister, Ella, had sponsored his trip to taking the Hajj. And in other ways, she also helped, as we found in our book, she helped him get his first job working on the trains, and going from the north to south. So he had a family. Even when it was so low after he lost his father and he was removed from his family and placed in a juvenile delinquency home in Mason. That's what that was. He was removed from his family. And he was placed in an environment where there were not many black people. Most of his classmates were white. And he was away from his family. While that opened him up into the ways of, how to live among these people, how people develop, even more developing his people skills. He had best friends. They respected him. They elected him as their class president, when he was in Mason. But when the powers that they were going to decide where they were going to place him next, he really wanted to be with his family, and so Ella arranged for him to go to Boston. We're talking, and I might be off by a year or two, 1938, 39, or actually maybe, 38, 39, around there. And you have to think about this time, how our families during this time period are operating and protecting our youth. Malcolm was also being protected by his family. So that was the story that we wanted to tell, but also the story we wanted to tell was what was the world like that Malcolm grew up in and that he was walking around in. And so that's why we spent a lot of time in this book talking about history and history of Marcus Garvey being and running the UNIA. His parents were organizers for the organization, and they knew him, and he visited them. But the other thing is that this is where I would say his internationalism came from. His own family. His mother was born in Grenada. His family, was already in an international group, and so it's not that it comes later after he's politicized and starts traveling. He gets it from her, and so I think it's really important to understand this more fuller picture of Malcolm X. And these are the things that my father was teaching me about how we gather facts to tell the story and understanding the story. We want to understand the larger picture, and the journalist should never say, "We may never know." It is the journalist's job to find out what happened. And, I don't want to get into the politics of what's happening with journalism now, but I think these are the lessons that we should keep in mind. Just because what's going on today in the world is happening, we need to understand that there are responsibilities and accountabilities that we need to take care of. And that is one of the things. Understanding that it is our responsibility to tell our stories and take control.
100%.
So that, and I also wanted to say my mother, me and my brother are products of two people who saw Malcolm X in person. My mother was in Howard when he spoke there. He was brought there by Stokely Carmichael, who later became Kwame Ture. And that's an amazing story also, because Kwame Ture was brilliant in the way that he brought Malcolm there. Howard rejected Malcolm X. The administration did not want him to come. They felt he was too radical. Malcolm X then was still traveling, speaking at Ivy League schools and other schools, and Kwame Ture organized a lecture series to expand the minds of the students. This is how brilliant he was. He was like, I'm going to speak the language of the administration. And he said, they want to expand our minds. They want us to be more brilliant. We need more information. So let's have a lecture series. His first speaker, I forgot who it was someone that the administration approved of, but the second speaker they were going to invite was Malcolm X. And that's what happened.
Give a round of applause. Those are just an introductory remarks. And we're going to have a brief conversation. I'm going to ask some questions. And of course, we're going to give her to you so y'all can get these books. Get these books. There's a bookstore hosting this, y'all. We'll go out of here empty. That ain't the watchword for the day, right? And the love on this, the love on what we have here, right? Let's appreciate source of knowledge. Y'all give my brothers and sisters a round of applause, please. Not only do they have this store, but they are not tenants. They own the space. Young heads, get out of this thing of being the perennial renter. And we're always gentrified and kicked from corner to corner, curb to curb, and out of every place where we should have our roots. Right? Let's learn these lessons. I just want you to stop, take a minute, back up. At the top of your remarks, you mentioned two giants. You mentioned the late great Yuri Kuchiyama, and you mentioned your dad. I want you to talk about dad as a human being, as a father, in addition to being a teacher, the journalist that we all came to know him for. Because folks need to know who Les Payne is, the seed that set all of this off.
I just want to say I picked this picture of my father because this was at a speech he gave at Marcus Garvey Park in 2015 for Malcolm X's birthday. I took this picture. But if he was here today, he would be like this. This is how he would look. So he is here in spirit. What can I say about my dad? I mean, he was an incredible man. I still mourn him every day. I feel him every day, and I miss him every day. But one thing I will just say is that, and I hope we give honor to, is that he was a very curious person, and he knew what to do with his curiosity. And searching for facts, how to relate to people, and however it translated. And one of the things, the reasons why he got into journalism, he was in the Army, he was in Vietnam. And one of the things he learned in Vietnam, you know, he was managing the Army Post newspaper, which isn't really the kind of journalism he would later practice. But what he said was,
It's a hell of a responsibility.
it is, but it wasn't, it's not the same.
Right.
But one of the things
That's the remix.
was while escorting a reporter for the Washington Post around the base, who was doing a series of stories about soldiers in Vietnam. He had what appeared in the series was a picture of the Confederate flag of one of the vehicles, some vehicles on the base. And the President of the United States, Johnson, who saw that and said, he called up my father's commander, Westmoreland, sorry, brain freeze here. And he told the person that told him, get that off. It's not a look, that's not the American flag, basically. And what my father realized was the importance of giving information, the importance of the power of information, that people with information can make informed decisions. And
People with information can make informed decisions.
That's what he was committed to. He wanted all of us, especially our community, because he knew that the information they would help from us, not understanding why we're being directed into certain neighborhoods and denied, you know, we may feel that we're being denied, but he was actually proving the fact that we were being denied access to financial fundings to start up our businesses. And we had to resort to other ways to start up and support our businesses. So my dad was reporting on stories like this. He was also reporting on stories of migrant workers on the east end of Long Island, not from the perspective of the landowners, but from the perspective of the farmers, who were Southerners. Today, they're a different group, migrants, or Mexicans usually today. But back then, they were migrants from the South. And so my father reported from that perspective by becoming one. He became and played the role of a migrant farmer from Alabama. And he did that for a week. And this is what I mean, it's this curiosity and wanting to get the story and how, the extent that he would go to get the story. And so this is just what he was about, pursuing facts, getting the story, and not stopping until you get the whole story. And even when things got dicey while he was there, he wanted to make sure he was there to see what it was like for these migrant workers to get their paycheck. And he reported that. Again, later on talk about the heroin trail. He was a part of a three-man team. So it wasn't just him. And so it was a three-man team that News had sent on this assignment to cover the trail of heroin from the poppy seeds of Turkey and into the United States. So that's what that story is about. Later on, he talks about the Soweto uprising, which was very important. We're talking about education in South Africa and the language that people can use. And these are all issues that also affect us. How can we use our language? What language is important? How we use language? One of the things I also talked about when people talk about when they're teaching Malcolm X, is that I think it's really important to talk about his use of language, his use of metaphors, imagery, how he strung words together.
Very accurate.
How also he spoke in run-on sentences.
That's right.
But it's important. Forget the fact that it's run-on sentences. He's teaching you. Every moment Malcolm speaks, he is teaching, no matter where he is. Whether he meets you on the street, he's teaching you. And I think about when he met up with some of the SNCC workers in Africa, and they, at that point, they had just gone and I know I'm jumping around, but they went to the Democratic Convention in 1964, and then after that, you know, with Fannie Lou Hamer and company, and that's an incredible story in itself. But after that trip, some of the sponsors of SNCC funded a trip for them to take a vacation and go to Africa. And some of them run into Malcolm X. And he's talking to them because he is in Ghana, and he's talking about human rights and what he's learning from his travels in Africa. He's already taken Hajj, and he's gone to different countries, And his last stop was in Ghana, and he's talking to them. So when they all leave and come back to the United States, you hear Fannie Lou Hamer talking about human rights, not civil rights anymore.
John Lewis was on that day.
Yes.
The late great John Lewis, who we just shut down the country for on July 17th, fell in on Malcolm's line, Africa. Go ahead, you go.
Again, these are some of the stories that we learned through the work that we were doing, and I'm learning through working with my father. And just not being afraid, not thinking that you're unable to do this because you lack experience. You learn by the mistakes that you make, and you just keep on going and keep on trudging. And even with writing, when you first sit down and write, your first draft is never going to be perfect. And and it was just, I remember him, we were really talking about, writing and how you tell the stories, how to choose going from showing and telling, when to show, when to tell, when do you stop and explain, but also when do you use the examples to explain it more powerfully, and so on and so forth. So those were some of the things that I learned, and just being able to get closer to my father about watching him practice something he was very passionate about, which is journalism. And then also, we have to understand when we talk about family, and I'll bring it back to my family, having the support of our family. My mom was working, she supported him traveling, he spent an enormous amount of time away from us growing up because he was covering these important stories. And not every white would put up with that, but my mom did. And she kept us, we were in school, some of us were doing orchestra outside of school, playing with the university orchestra, and she made sure that none of that stopped. So it's important that we understand that we're not alone. It is about family, it is about community, and it is about supporting each other. And that was also the thing that Malcolm X was talking a lot about throughout what we keep talking about, how we treat each other. Not assuming the worst of each other, but we have to treat each other better. We also have to be accountable for what we bring into the situation. And just uncovering these stories. And that, if you like, I'd like to read a little bit from the book.
Can you see all right?
I will read it.
I mean, while she's pulling the excerpt that she wants to read, folks, hydrate yourselves. Be careful out here. I want to acknowledge my brother, the founder of All Politics Are Local, America's #1 hip-hop political talk show. Ed Riley is in the house. He's taping us. Right? My comrades from the People's Organization for Progress are here, led by their vice chair, Ingrid Hill. Right? Ollie McBride, one of our babies, that was African Echoes. And the African Echoes still exists. Right? NAACP is here also. Right, and a bunch of folks. I just want to do some. Fisa, I saw you walking here, right? Teacher of here at Shabazz High School, by the way, right? It's been a help to me personally in terms of what we're trying to do with the Malcolm X commemoration. But this is housekeeping I wanted to do. Go ahead. You found your excerpt? Go right ahead.
I don't know if everybody here has read from the book, but this is what I call the Hartford chapter. Starting with a blank slate in Hartford, Malcolm saw no reason to throw the fear of Allah too quickly into the hearts of hard-working potential converts. Never give meat to a baby. Always give them milk, and you'll never lose them, Malcolm advised his brother Filbert on his method of recruiting Muslim followers. That is the key in setting up new temples. One of the hindrances of the past in trying to propagate Islam, we overtaught the lost found, giving them meat that they just could not digest, thereby making many rebellious and go back, just because once we got them to open their minds, we started giving them too heavy a food that they just could not see yet. Nevertheless, disciplining the faithful in Hartford taxed Malcolm's patience at the outset. Both Rosalie and her daughter relentlessly smoked as did others in the apartment. And Rosalie Glover is the woman who invited Malcolm to Hartford because she was searching for building up a new community. She was part of the Morton Science Temple. She fell out with them and she wanted to find something new. She saw Malcolm speak in Springfield and decided that she wanted to work with him. So she invites him to her apartment to meet with people who would be possibly converts. And so we're in her apartment. It's the first meeting. So both Rosalie and her daughter relentlessly smoked, as did others in the apartment. Malcolm initially endured the heavy carbon nicotine haze in silence. When offered pork chops, he simply declined. His framed, upchucked, inspiring lecture on the sins of eating meat from the worm-infested swine would come later. Aside from ethical reform and Muslim submission, it was Malcolm's clarion call for black resistance to racism that pitched him forward, that pitched him beyond the outer reaches of Elijah Muhammad's strictly religious orbit. Awaiting permission to shake up Detroit, not to mention the messenger's own Chicago headquarters, Malcolm was insensitive to the risk and possible danger posed by his aggression on the turf of his elders. In pushing against what he took to be apathy, if not sloth, he sincerely saw himself as promoting not himself, as insiders would charge, but Elijah Muhammad. Along the way, he sought to make himself indispensable, as he had every job he held since the days as a hustling sandwich man on the New Haven Railroad. The messenger had to chastise him on some point during nearly every visit to Chicago. Malcolm wrote of this period. I just couldn't keep from showing in some manner that with his ministers equipped with the power of his message, I felt the nation should go much faster. Shaped by his segregated Southern upbringing and narrow education, Elijah Muhammad's vision for his vanguard religious cult was too provincial to keep pace with Malcolm's more open-minded ambitions for building a truly national black movement. The messenger once warned his young minister that speed, although perhaps desirable, would destroy an old car. On another occasion, he sharply chastised Malcolm's critique of an inefficient, though reliable Muslim minister, telling Malcolm, I would rather have a mule I can depend upon than a racehorse that I can't depend upon. The FBI kept abreast of such fissures. In fact, the Bureau was eager to foment greater discord between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. In time, special agents working out of the Hartford Post Office recruited Bellevue Square residents to provide inside information in exchange for payments. And Bellevue Square residents is referring to those who were going to these meetings that Malcolm was leading. These FBI informants attended Black Muslim meetings and then summarized Malcolm's lectures, listing the names of attendees and supplying schedules of all Nation of Islam events in Hartford area. These factoids began making it into the Bureau memoranda, which were then filled by the special agent in charge of the New Haven field office. Under this heavy federal and local police surveillance, Elijah Muhammad's national spokesman continued to dramatically increase the Harvard enrollment and to step up its overall educational level. The Thursday night group that Malcolm had nourished from cradle up moved from the St. John home to the second floor space of the Parsons Theater. Elijah Muhammad granted the Hartford Muslims the title Temple Number 14 at the end of 1956. Malcolm proudly wrote Elijah Muhammad, the East Coast has many rough spots due to the newness of the Muslims, but overall, the dead there are rising.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Good excerpt. Several things very quickly. I just wanted to comment on that because that captures, in my mind, two of the very important strengths of the book. And I'll come back to you with your feedback on what I'm saying. One, it gives you a picture. We know of Malcolm in the street building the Nation of Islam. Coming from the street as an ex-hustler and an ex-con, building the Nation of Islam from the ranks of those of us who have been in those spaces and have that kind of background. This gives a picture of another grouping of our community all together. And once Malcolm got through with the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam looked like our community. It wasn't just those of us who come up from the mud, as we used to say, right? But it also reflected a professional class that was in the Nation of Islam, a group of folks who came out of the black church and black traditions. Malcolm had a way of uniquely engaging all of them at their own level, but with his own pristine sense of purpose and clarity, discipline, and principle that ultimately would bring many over to the way, right? So that's one of the huge strengths of this book. I'm going to throw a few words at you. And you think about Malcolm and your dad and just respond to them as you see fit. Integrity.
Malcolm had integrity, authenticity, and he was always in search of the truth.
Well, let's build on that second word, because I was coming to that. Authenticity. When you say authenticity, what you
Malcolm was always authentic in that he was true to who he was. He wasn't switching up so much as what was switching, or what we even call code switching, was how we communicate with each other to get the point across, how we communicate with each other. But he was authentic to his point. He did not sway from that. And the other thing I thought saw about Malcolm through doing this work is, you know, while he was in prison, he really came into what his purpose was, and he stayed true to that purpose. So that's where the authenticity. He knew he was on purpose, and he stayed true to that.
organizing.
Through his blood, he got it in his blood, and he, again, excellent organizer. But where does it start? He saw his parents do it.
His parents
His home was an organized center. His father was organized in how he built rotated crops and organized the neighbors and how they were going to grow crops, because they were farmers, right? Organized in how his mother would check over their homework, tell them stories, them being the children, stories when they would come home about how they may have had a rough day with their classmates and how they called them the N-word. And she would say, well, there's a way of dealing with that. You can make it look like they hit their target and respond, or you can make it look like they didn't hit their target and not respond. You feel a certain way when you hit your target. You feel a different way when you don't hit your target. And she's like, putting these metaphors and imageries out there for them. And again, these are things that his parents were doing in the household. And so Malcolm's giving this in a very early age.
You should acknowledge that just before May 19th, just before the actual centennial day, IBW took a delegation of activists from the United States to Grenada.
Yep.
To Malcolm's mother's Grenada.
Yep.
And there is in the process of building out a Malcolm X Memorial Foundation in Grenada honoring Malcolm and Louise Langdon Norton Little, his proud, brave, Garveyite mother. And she was not just a good mom and a good Garveyite. She was a trially trusted member within the clandestine dimensions of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. When Mr. Garvey had been on the run from the state forces, both either in Canada or in the United States, one of the trusted places they could come to was the home of Earl and Louise Langdon Norton Little. That ain't no joke. And when you see what the attention that they drew at being organizers for Mr. Garvey, they literally gave their lives to Mr. Garvey. So in all that, Malcolm also learned something called courage and commitment. Right? Now, a lot is in the air now, thankfully, just within the last few years, in terms of decent things that have been done and written on Malcolm. Outside of this great book that your dad did, outside of the autobiography, October 25th is the 60th anniversary of the release of the autobiography. We're going to be doing some things here and in New York and around that. Look forward to it, right? Any other books that you've seen and read that's on the horizon now that you think merits some attention?
On Malcolm? I mean, I know that Evermax Candy has a children's book that's coming out.
It's out,
Or it just came out, right? Mapping Malcolm, which is
That's under the radar. Talk about that for a minute.
what I enjoy about Mapping Malcolm. This is a book edited by Nadja Zicki Johnson, a young woman who lives in Harlem. But she is looking at how people today are interpreting Malcolm in their own disciplines, whether they're architects, teachers, educators, artists. And so people have written essays about Malcolm X and and even tracing where he went. Like they have an essay in there where they talk about Malcolm X having a meeting at Kumbukeni-Reclaiming's apartment in Harlem.
I've been in some of the meetings.
You weren't at that one, huh?
No, not at that one. Later.
And I've been in some of those meetings too, but this meeting was specifically for some Japanese scholars who really wanted to meet Malcolm X. And,
Incredible, sir.
and when they were, Yuri Kuchiyama is a Japanese American activist, she passed away in 2014. But the scholars that she was in touch with, she asked them, what do you want to do when you come to Harlem? They said they want to see the real Harlem, but then they said there's one person who really want to meet, and that's Malcolm X. She didn't know how she could make that happen, but she did what she always does. And again, determination. Don't assume that because you're nobody, nobody's a nobody. You just put the effort out.
Nobody is a nobody.
She put the effort out. She invited him, sent an invitation to his office, told him what time, and he showed up.
Now, for those not familiar with her name and her history, y'all know that during World War II, this government, the one that you pay taxes for, put Japanese Americans in concentration camps in the United States.
Yep.
This government.
Yep.
Yuri Kuchiyama was a concentration camp survivor. While she was in those concentration camps, a medical worker, a professional nurse, not willing to accept the conditions in which her people were treated, Yuri was organizing resistance to their mistreatment in those concentration camps. Of course, we know that in World War II, that's the catalyst of the ending of World War II was the use of the nuclear bomb on Japan. Not on Europe, on Japan. Y'all do that now. And out of the ashes of that, Yuri became a leading figure internationally in what was the nuclear disarmament movement. When she met Malcolm, she was a legend already in her own right. And if you pardon me for saying it like this, is my more authenticity, Malcolm loved that shit. Right? And went to recruiting people like her, people of her caliber, into the OAAU. And of course, some of you have seen that epic picture on February 21st when Malcolm was down after he had been hit, and she was bringing, medical aids in because that's who she was and that's what she did. And of course, after that, she continued to be a beacon of what we call international human solidarity, right? And it was this big relationship between her and the Black Panther Party, Puerto Rican independence movement, the new African independence movement, and all that. The Kemi's the body. So I just wanted to put a point in that.
And the other thing about Yuri, she was an incredible connector. She saw, she's definitely somebody who always said, I'm a nobody. I remember reading a letter she wrote to Malcolm X after she had met him, and she was saying how enamored she was in meeting him because, she saw him as being this very important person. She was a nobody, and he took time to meet with her. But the thing is that, look, you recognize when people are authentic, being authentic. Yuri was always authentic, as was Malcolm X. They recognize that in each other. She told me that she admired him for the work that he was doing in organizing people, his people. And she admired that. And that is also what continued to help with her radicalization. And so she would research it, she would transcribe his speeches on the radio as she would hear it. She followed him. Unlike some people who would see him, they would never think about following him again, but they were like, oh, we met Malcolm X in that position. Yuri was not like that. Yuri was committed. Again, look at authentic and committed person with integrity. Powerful woman. And that's another thing, is that people in this movement were generous. Malcolm was generous. Think about all the time he gave to us and organizing and putting up with a lot of stuff. And all that time that took away from his whole family. His daughters, his wife.
That's right. Right. Let me wind up with these two things. One, I want you to say a little bit about Wilfred, who he was. His father got the stuff. He was the first to go into the Nation of Islam from the little family, was a master in his own right, and really was him and along with his sister Ella really did a lot to salvage the family after what had been done with the attacks on their mother and their father.
I mean, Wilfred, being Malcolm's oldest brother, you know, I met him once. It was wonderful. Sounded like Malcolm in a lot of ways, and looked like him if Malcolm X had lived to be older. And but again, a storyteller, very generous, was very committed also to organizing. One of the reasons why he joined the Nation of Islam is because he identified with the goals of the Nation of Islam that was similar to what Marcus Garvey was in, which is what he was brought up in. And that's what really connected me to that. And he wanted his whole family involved because he knew that that was something that they could really flourish. And they did, the whole family did, meaning especially the brothers. And he orchestrated how to bring Malcolm into the fold. Malcolm was in jail when this happened, when he joined the nation. And he orchestrated the brothers and how they were going to bring Malcolm into coming around onto this, giving up court and all of that, and committing to the prayers and learning and opening up his mind to this. Wilfred Little was, you know, and he was the one when Malcolm was in his deepest trouble, tough days. He always talked to Wilfred Little. He would stop and say, "Look, I'm stopping over in Detroit, meet me for a layover." And that's when he would discuss some of the things that he was learning. He was learning about the negative things in the nation that were going on in the Nation of Islam. And look at it and say, "Yeah, that's been going on. We didn't tell you because you're so committed to Elijah Muhammad and the teachings that you probably would have told on us." You know, but again, it's family that helps him. Having somebody that he can confide in that would understand that happened. And Wilfred still said, he still believes and supports you what you're doing, but yeah, I'm going to help you see what's going on and what people are saying.
By the way, May 19th is a loaded day. Not only do we get Malcolm, on that day we would lose Wilfred. Wilfred passed away on his brother's birthday. On that day, Ilombe Grab, one of my personal teachers, he really took over the reins of Pan-Africanism in Harlem, you know, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, standing on the shoulders of his Garvey roots and his relationship with Malcolm X, right? Vincent Harding was very close to Dr. King, and White wrote some speeches for Dr. King and gave us an epic book called There Is a River that lays out the slave resistance origins of the black radical tradition. We wouldn't fighting crackers out of the sky. We had that's a long conversation we've been having with your friend the white man. The spook who sat by the door. Say the name.
Greenlee.
Sam Greenlee. They all left on May 9th, all left for the ancestors on May 19, 2014. Yuri Kuchiyama, born on May 19, 5 years before Malcolm. A poet who was a big friend of mine named Luis Reyes Rivera, an Afro-Puerto Rican, who's a part of the New Yorican movement in the early 70s, gave us the definitive piece in terms of poetry on Malcolm's assassination, A Place I'd Never Been. Right? Was you there? Some of y'all might remember that. I brought Lewis to the gravesite in 2000. He did that poem at Malcolm's gravesite and we all lost it. Right? Lewis would later pass away on May 19th. I'll take that back. Lewis's birthday is May 19th. Right? And then, of course, there's Ho Chi Minh. the revolutionary that led Vietnam to defeat the Japanese, the French,
And the
and
United
the United
States.
States,
Yep.
who took notes in Harlem, USA, from Mr. Garvey himself. All of that, May 19th. That ancestral math, you got to roll with it, right? So, any last takeaways you want to give us? Because I want to appreciate everybody's patience. I actually envisioned us doing this in like 15 minutes. We went in. We went in good, and it was good. Give her a round of applause.
Again, I just want to thank you. I'm so honored to be here and celebrating, talking about Malcolm X, my father. Some of my favorite topics to talk and speak on. Less pain.
That's right. And that's part of the ancestral practice too, is say the names.
I just see him as my dad. I never called him less pain.
I know that's right, baby. I know. Right, you were lucky to have a dad like that. A lot of us didn't.
But less pain, Malcolm X. I hope that we continue to learn from these ancestors, not just them, but these
The
stories.
Dead Are Arising is the book, y'all.
We stand on their shoulders. I think it's important that we look, especially during these times right now. We're up against the wall right now. This is when our art becomes so important. And again, please think about.
Oh, wait a minute. I got to ask you this question. You think you do some sugar in my memory? You grew up on Malcolm X speeches in your daddy's house. What's your favorite Malcolm X speech? No argument there. I'm raising that to add to her point as we wind. The politics of the United Front are the order of the day. Trump is one of the worst human beings of his kind, absolutely dangerous to everybody who believes in anything decent and democratic, and a lot of white folks in this country are still stuck on that mess. But fascists have come and fascists have gone. We lived and endured and ultimately out-organized and out-fought fascism when we beat Jim Crow. But we didn't just do that with the ballot, and we didn't just do that with praying, right? The politics of the United Front is the order of the day. Ed is also not just representing our radio show, but he's also representing the National Black Political Convention. We were trying to have a 50th anniversary a couple of years ago, and we still have the formation that made up the group of that effort to keep that conversation, the question around the United Front, going. Because that's Malcolm's line, and that is so ever present and applicable to this particular moment. Y'all all right?
Yep.
Y'all all right?
Yep.
Now say Malcolm, y'all say Malcolm.
Malcolm.
No, y'all supposed to say X. Malcolm.
X.
Malcolm.
X.
Malcolm.
X.
Malcolm.
X.
Shut him down. Shut him down.
Shut him down.
Shut him down.
Shut him down.
By any means necessary.
By any
Y'all get you some water and love on each other. We're going to bring her over to the books. I want to get her out. I want to get everybody out of this sun. We can do that over the table because it's been a minute. I'm a heat stroke survivor, so I'm trying to have some mercy on folks. All right? Kill it, baby. Kill it.
Be well, everyone. Kila Lahiri.
Mr. DJ, play that funk.